Good. Appreciate that. The enthusiasm and the comments. I'd like to welcome everybody here to Sabbath services, and glad to be here. It seems like we were just here after 2 days last week, a Pentecost weekend that we had here, and had a fine time. We had enjoyed some meals and fellowship after both the services last weekend. And I know Mark told me that last week they had a great time up there as well, and I know the people that were there enjoyed that as well. Vanity of vanities. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. We see the writer in the book of Ecclesiastes, and by the way, that word Ecclesiastes, if you'll remember when the word church in the Greek is ecclesia, the word Ecclesiastes is a similar word that means actually an assembly, and of course the Ecclesiastes means the preacher or the one that's delivering the message. That's where the title came from. We see the writer here describing life from his perspective. At first glance, though, when we read this book, we hear the ramblings of someone who appears to be mentally disturbed, perhaps suffering from depression or possibly suicidal, and yet we know that the principles of the Bible are not such that would instruct one to possess these types of qualities. How are we to interpret this book, Ecclesiastes? Let's continue reading there. I read from chapter 1 and verse 2, and he says, the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit a man of all his labor which he has taken under the sun? And of course, he's not talking about things that are heavenly. He's talking about things that are here on this earth, under the sun. One generation passes away and another generation comes. I remember looking in one of these restaurants that I was in down in South Texas here recently, of these old black and white photographs. One of them, there was a little river running through South Texas there, and here were all these men in their suits on obviously a baptism. And they waded right out into the water in their three-piece suits. And this old black photograph is showing them in their hats, and they're baptizing someone in the river. And this picture was taken in the 1800s. And I thought, every one of those people in that photograph are all dead. They're all gone. It was over 150 years ago. This photograph, which I found captured a moment of someone's life. And all these people were lined up along the banks of this river watching this baptism take place. I stood there and stared at that photograph for a long time. The lady was waiting for me to take my money after I got up to pay my bill. And it just drew me in to realize that these people have lived their lives. They had their problems. They had their families. They survived. They gardened. They did whatever they did at their job. And it's all over with now for them. He says, one generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. Boy, is that not a striking statement in today's society. When they're talking about the world's gonna, fall apart. And here, this preacher is telling us that even though generations come and go, the earth is going to abide forever. The sun also rises and the sun goes down. It hastes to the place where it rose. The wind goes toward the south and turns about to the north. It whirls about continually, and the wind returns again according to the circuits. It's like a circuitous wind pattern. Here, scientists now know that these wind patterns that they would find out centuries later in sailing, that they could sail across the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean because of these continuous winds that had their direction even during the time of the Apostle Paul. You remember, he knew that certain times of the year you could make that voyage across the Mediterranean, and there were certain times that you shouldn't go because the wind was contrary to them. And of course, they suffered shipwreck on one occasion. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again. It's just this constant flow for hundreds and hundreds of years out into the Gulf or out into the bays and estuaries of the oceans of the world. 3 billion gallons per second on some of these. It's unbelievable. All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear with hearing. I don't care how old you are. I don't care where all you've traveled. I never get tired of looking at a new place. Judy and I on the way to church today, we missed my turn. I said, hey, how about let's go down 7th Street? So we make a right turn, and she goes, how about let's do that? We drove down through the neighborhood and we saw some new homes and new places we've never seen before. And I was like, hey, this was fun to get to see some new territory. I'll do that driving along in some of these oil leases. I'll just take an old country road. The other day I took one, it was a dead end. I backed up and high-centered in the bar ditch. I wish I hadn't taken that turn, but life brings those things to us sometimes. We never get tired of looking at new places, meeting new people, seeing new things, and watching different events. And that's what he's saying here. The thing that has been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there's no new thing under the sun. You know, they've always had somebody that will dress weird. They've always had somebody that would cut their hair a certain way. They've always had somebody that do some sort of a gyration with their body that everybody thought strange, or wear their pants down below their kneecaps, or whatever it might be. I saw this photograph here not too long ago of it was like in the 1920s. These kids think they're so cool now, wearing their pants down below the bottom of their, back pockets, And this man, he was, I can't even remember his name now. He was called Slim or something like that. He was real tall, and he pulls his pants down to about his knees, and he stretches his shirt all the way down and tucks it in, and his belt is down around right above his kneecaps. And it was a show, and it was hilarious watching him. But, they think that they have invented something new by wearing your pants down below your waistline. No, hair and clothing and acting weird and dressing weird and cutting your hair a certain way or letting it grow out till it reaches the bottom of your hips. I don't know. I guess there's always been these events. He says, is there anything where it may be said, see, this is new? It has already been of old time, which was before us. There is no remembrance of former things, and that is so true. I've been watching this week, all week. Had to fly down to San Antonio on Monday. I flew back on Monday night. I then took a plane on Tuesday morning and flew down to South Texas, where I was down there for a couple of days, and then flew back. So I had a lot of road time. I burned up a whole tank of gas while I was down there in Carrizo Springs, running back and forth, because everything down there is 40 miles away. I mean, you go over to this well and it's an hour away, and then over to that well. I was watching some of these videos of the Medal of Honor winners of World War II, of Vietnam, of Korea. Those stories fascinate me. They'll zoom in on this soldier and he'll tell his story. And one of the old men that was a World War II veteran struck me, it really struck me what he said. He's a school teacher now. And he says, what do you say to one of these little beauties in front of you in the classroom that looks at you and said, what is it like to kill a human being? He said, that's a tough question, isn't it? But you got to give them an answer. And he told them, and I thought it was great, that on Veterans Day you should remember that the reason that you're able to sit here in this country and in this classroom is because someone somewhere had to give their life or take a life. I thought it was a great answer. This scripture here says that we forget about history, and it's almost gone now. The end of World War II, that seems like it was 75 years ago. I can't believe it. And there is youngsters coming up now, never heard about World War II, never seen, the documentaries, never investigated, and eventually they will never be able to talk to someone. Of course, the digital age is going to help that to live, so that maybe we won't forget. But many of those veterans, and by the way, every single one of them said, I don't deserve the Medal of Honor. Every single one of them said, I don't deserve it. This medal I wear for my buddies I left out there on the field. That's who this medal belongs to. But they all said that we want to never forget what happened so that we never have to go to war again. There is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come for those that with those that shall come hereafter. I lost my place completely here in my notes because I got sidetracked here. This is Solomon, King Solomon, that wrote that. His name is not even mentioned in this book anywhere. But look at the next verse. He says, I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. And so from that, most of the commentaries will interpret or read this and know, because of the timing of the book and in the order in which it was placed, that this was the son of David, King Solomon, because of his wisdom. And he talks about wisdom throughout this chapter. I want to read a little bit here. He says, I was preacher, I was king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I gave my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom concerning all things that be done under heaven. Again, there's that term, under heaven. He uses that repeatedly throughout the book. I think about 29 times. This sore travail hath God given to the sons of man to be exercised therewith. It's like it's a grievous task to him. Life is like a grievous task. And it can be that way. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. And that term actually means it's like grasping at the wind. That's what the term actually means. That which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. When I wrote this down, when I was going through this morning, I thought about flying over the Mississippi River, which I've done hundreds of times. If you've ever flown over the Mississippi, it is a mighty river. But what you can see from the air, which you can't see on the ground, there are convolutions in that river that extend out once before in history, miles to the east and to the west, where that river changed course. And there'll be a section of farmland, and you can see where that old riverbed used to run miles over here and then came back. And now the river has completely filled that all in, and they've got gardens and they're growing crops there. Once this person on the east side of the river didn't have the whole section of land, now has another complete mile of property because the river has changed course. And man cannot control that, even though he tries. He says, I commune with my own heart, and lo, I am come to great estate. I've gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me in Jerusalem. And we know that Solomon prayed as a young king to God. And God said, ask what you will. He could have asked for treasures, money, wealth, whatever, power. And what did he pray to God for? Please give me wisdom that I may govern your people. And God was so impressed with that answer. He says, you're going to get wisdom above all in Israel, but along with it, you're going to get wealth as well. And so here, this is absolutely a confirmation that this is Solomon. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is vexation of spirit. For in much wisdom, now I can, not that I have much wisdom, but I can relate to this scripture somewhat. In much wisdom is much grief, and he that increases knowledge increases sorrow. You know, when Isaiah was given the responsibility, and Jeremiah and some of the other prophets, it had been described as them taking this book and eating this book that was going to be like honey in their mouth, but in their belly it was going to be bitter. And for some time I didn't understand what that meant until you began to read and you began to study and you began to see what unfolds in the history of man, the prophecies about what is eventually going to happen to man if he continues down the road that he's going. And you realize God's word is sweet as honey in your mouth. When you read it and you first take it in and imbibe it, it is so glorious and soothing to your soul. But when you let those things sink down and realize the society in which we live and know that God's judgment is coming upon mankind, it's very disturbing. is very concerning, and it can be bitter in your stomach. As I said, this was King Solomon, the wisest man that ever had. He had great wisdom and knowledge and unimaginable wealth and power. And he made these observations of life and asked the question of himself or to himself, what's it all about? And you've heard people say that in movies and stories before. What is it all about? Why am I going through all this? Why is life's journey such a convoluted one? Why are we here, and what is our purpose? It seems like I get up every day, I go to work, I try to pay my bills, I never seem to be going anywhere, doing anything, making any advances in my life. I had high expectations as a young person. I had goals that I wanted to achieve. There were things that I thought I was going to be doing by now. And here I am, still grinding away. And it seems like it's all useless. And as he examines these individual aspects of life, he determines that they are all vanity. Are we then to take this book as license to cast away every effort in this life? Just cast it into the wind, and since supposedly all of life is vanity. I've heard people take that position. Well, it's all vanity, so what's the use? Is that the attitude that we're to possess? Are we just to say all is vanity, so why do we even bother trying? This book has been examined and determined that it can be viewed from two different points of view. One describes the book of Ecclesiastes, as pessimistic, cynical, skeptical, hedonistic, agnostic from that point of view. And it shows a picture of a man who's in doubt and who wanders far from God. One who's lost all hope of a positive outcome. And you can kind of see that in some of these verses. What's the use? All is vanity. The other, however, and I'd like to maybe focus on this point of view, it examines the book and depicts the author as a man of faith. One who is a realist, though, who sees that man cannot put the whole of life together. He lives here, but he can't grasp the whole picture. The reason for this viewpoint, I believe, is from within the book itself. He describes God as being good. He also shows that God has a wise plan, which he uses, and that God is just. And throughout the book, if you read through this book, it's only 12 chapters here. It's very easy to read through it. Throughout this book, he always exhorts man to fear God. So I believe that the latter is the viewpoint that we should take, a positive aspect. And yes, there are some negative comments that are made here that we'll look at. In chapter 2 and verse 1, he says, I said in my heart, go now, and I will prove thee with mirth or with gladness. Therefore enjoy pleasure, and behold, this also is vanity. As we read through this second chapter here, I want to make this statement. We think we know what will bring about satisfaction in our life. And you sit back and think about this. If I only had more money, if I only had this certain possession, this house or whatever, if I lived at this certain place, or if I had this job, perhaps if I had that job, then my life would be much better. If I'd have gone to college, if I'd have been a doctor, I went after my doctorate's degree that I thought I wanted to do, or I buy this house or toy, whatever it might be, we think we know what will make us happy. We're going to find out here in this chapter that Solomon thought that too. He really thought these things would bring him satisfaction, gratification, and fulfillment. Look at it. He said of laughter, it's madness, or it is mad, and mirth. What does it accomplish? I sought in my heart to give myself to wine. I don't know if he became an alcoholic. I don't think that's what it's saying. Maybe he became a vintner. Maybe he had vineyards and he grew grapes and he made wine and he supplied the whole nation with wine. Solomon's, 1990 or 996, year. Maybe that's what it was. I don't know. Maybe he was supplying the country with wine. Yet acquainted my heart with wisdom, and to lay hold of folly, till I might see what that good for the sons of men, which they should do under the heaven all the days of their life. I made me great works, I builded me houses. He was a construction or maybe a contractor that contracted all these people to build these great stone buildings and houses. I planted me vineyards, there it is. I made me gardens and orchards. I planted trees in them of all kinds of fruits. I don't know what he had, pecans and pears and apples and plums, pomegranates, peaches, all the crops and trees that could grow in that region. I made me pools of water to water wherewith the wood that brings forth trees. So he had these probably like Roman aqueducts, or he had these great fountains that would bubble up, like if you go in some of the great cities of the world, where they've channeled water from the creeks that are at higher elevation right into the city underground, and they burst forth because they're coming up at the same level as the stream. So here's this beautiful fountain without any pumps or any mechanized systems to make them pressure up. I'm sure that he had something like that. He says, I got me servants and maidens and servants born in my house. And I also had great possessions of great and small cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. So he was not only a vintner, he was a rancher. He grew all of these cattle and livestock. I gathered me silver and gold and peculiar treasure of kings and of the provinces. I read here recently that Franklin Delano Roosevelt on December the 7th, 1941 was sitting in the White House working on his stamp collection. I didn't know that about him. It was just a funny fact that popped into my head for all of a sudden. But here was something that he enjoyed, he collected, he thought was important to collect these stamps. And he probably had stamps from all over the world because there was a lot more letter writing going on right now. A young lady at the office told me the other day that one of her nieces, told her to mail this letter, and she said, but be sure and put a stamp on it. She said, what's a stamp? Because a young girl had never mailed a letter in the age of emails. She didn't even know what a stamp was. So that makes me feel a little old, but that's... He says, I got me men singers and women singers and the delights of the sons of men as musical instruments of all sort. And I can just imagine how many cattle, how many musical instruments that he had, of the singers and the carolers, whatever it might be. So I was great and increased in more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. He didn't lose his wisdom that God had given him. And whatsoever my eye desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor. And this was my portion in all my labor. Then I looked, notice this, on all the works that my hands had wrought. Now that is quite an accomplishment when you read about all that quickly here in like 5 minutes. This is years of work and labor and toil and organization and planning and building. Years of it. And on the labor that I had labored to do, and beheld, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. As I said, we think we know what will make us happy. And in the end of it all, he realizes that this was almost a waste of time. It's completely opposite from the human desire that we have. It's like the famous persons will say to you, they wish they had never become famous. We all want fame and fortune and everybody to know who we are and have, all of this recognition from around the world. And yet with it comes a life that is deprived of being able to walk down the street and free. They will absolutely mob one of these so-called movie stars or celebrities now that go out and they've got a camera, in every, conceivable position trying to catch them in an awkward moment. They lose their freedom because of it. There is no profit under the sun. And I wrote in my margin here, this is laughable, because this is what we all desire and seek. as I said, we think we know what will bring about satisfaction. Whether wise or foolish, though, Solomon stumbles to the fact that one event happens to every human being. And I'd like to read down in verse 14. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. I myself perceived also that one event happens to them all. Then I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, so happened it even to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this is also vanity, for there is no remembrance of the wise man, or the wise more than the fool forever. Seeing that which now is in the days to come shall all be forgotten. And how dieth the wise man? As the fool. They both. You go to the graveyards today and you drive through one of them, and I like to do that every once in a while. Look at the old graves, like the ones I saw out in Nevada that time. Old redwood grave tombstones that were carved out and carved the names into these old redwood tombstones. You can't tell which one was the thief and which one was the robber and which one was the fool and which one was the rich man. You might be able to look at something really elaborate and say, well, that possibly could have been somebody very wealthy. But they all died, like that photograph I told you about. They're all gone. The poor, the pauper, the rich, the banker, the whatever, the preacher, they're all gone. They all succumbed to the natural course of life. Therefore I hated life, because the work that was wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. And so again, he comes to this conclusion here that almost seems very depressed and maybe suicidal or mentally deranged, that he had this outlook on life even having accomplished all that. But in the end of that, he comes to this conclusion down in verse 24. There is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. That's why I say there is a positive and a negative side of this story, but there's also a positive side. And I believe that this man believed in God, and that he saw God's hand in everything that he did. And this, he knew that this was a gift of God in his life. Down in verse, let's see, I was at verse 24. I want to go now over to chapter 3. I want to read a little bit of this chapter here, because I like this chapter. I often read this sometime at funerals because it is so poetic. And I'm not going to read all of it. He says, to everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. There's a time to be born. There are over 360,000 people being born every day. I remember when my grandson was born. I remember when my children were born. That's a very happy time. There's a time to die. I've been to way too many funerals. I have in the front of my Bible here. I believe every funeral that I've ever conducted, I wrote down. Some of them I didn't conduct, and I still wrote them down in my Bible and the dates. And I looked through them this morning because I came to this scripture and it reminded me of that list. And I went back and almost teared up at some of the people that I've loved and some of the people you've loved, our brethren, family members that are gone now. And I miss them dearly. I certainly miss them dearly. I wish I could see their face and see their smile and look at their expression. A time to plant, a time to pluck up that which is planted, harvest time. A time to kill. That doesn't necessarily mean kill someone. Maybe it is in a time of war. Maybe it's to kill animals so that you can feed your family. A time to heal. I believe that means physically and spiritually. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep. A time to laugh. A time to mourn. And a time to dance. For some people, though, there's never a time to dance. I'm including myself in that. That's a joke. We had my son's wedding several weeks ago, and after a little bit of wine and the music's playing, we were all out there dancing, and I realized some people shouldn't be dancing. But I love those folks up there in Tennessee because they were all sitting around kind of waiting, and this modern music is playing, and some country and western music. We got up, and then they played Rocky Top. And I tell you, those people came out of those chairs so fast, and they started dancing around the floor, and it was hilarious, and it was delightful, and we had a celebration that was on a grand scale. And that makes me laugh. It does. He says down in verse 9, "What profit hath he that works in that wherein he labors? I have seen the travail which God has given to the sons of men to be exercised in it." We occupy all of our time with all of these things. He's made everything beautiful in His time. Also, He set the world in their heart. I studied on this scripture and thought about, what is He telling me here? It's almost as if He is saying, while we're occupied with all these things in this world, we have something that is never quite satisfied in our heart and mind. Something out there that drives us daily, that keeps us working and diligently laboring, and yet we never quite feel satisfaction. I believe that is something God put within us to keep looking for the future and keep driving forward and keep looking for those answers of life, so that no man can find out the work that God makes from the beginning to the end. There is the answer. We're striving to understand it all, and so is Solomon, and yet he admits in all of his wisdom that he had, he couldn't figure it out. And it's purposeful. There's a reason why it is that way. I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and do good in his life, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor, it is a gift of God. Again, he comes to this conclusion that if I just go out there and pull some weeds out of my flower garden, or like I did yesterday afternoon before the sun went down, I went out and mowed my yard and sprayed off the patio, and I trimmed up a few things, and I watered all of Judy's plants, and I washed all 3 of the cars. And when I was done, I sat down there and I just felt so good. I felt much better than I did with all the stuff I did this week at work. The joy that I got, the satisfaction of my labor. And I got up this morning and the grass is neatly trimmed, and the birds are singing, and the wind is blowing through the trees. I mean, that is really true happiness. That is really true gratification and happiness. I know that whatsoever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it nor taken from it. And God doeth it, that man should fear before Him. And there again, he uses this analogy about God. He comes to the conclusion that is God. I'd love to go through this whole book with you, but for lack of time here, I'll just skip through a couple of the next items here. As he mentioned in this chapter here, that there was a season for each of these, but we yearn for something greater and we don't often know what it is. God has a wise plan that is not fully known to man, and it's frustrating at times. I believe it was for Solomon. I mentioned the negative aspects of the book, but did you know vanity is in this book? Vanity is never described of God or God's work or God's revelation. Even wisdom, as Solomon would soon find out, has its limitations. God is eventually going to judge the righteous and the wicked, as he would the rest of that chapter there. Chapter 4, just briefly here, he tells us that oppression increases vanity, and also envy and idleness and covetousness. All of those things increase vanity in a person's life. It's like it's a multiplier in a person's life if you have those attributes. In chapter 5, he talks about avoiding religious exercises. Maybe we'll read the first two verses there. Keep your foot when you go to the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifices of fools. And they consider not that they do evil. But be not brash with your mouth, and let not your heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and you are upon the earth. Therefore, let your words be few. I think that is remarkable advice that Solomon gives us. In chapter 15, down in verse 15, he says, and he's talking here, he gets into the subject of wealth and riches. He says, and he came forth of his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor which he may carry away in his hand. All of those people that are in those graves in the cemetery didn't take their wealth with them. Maybe they buried some jewelry with the folks, but all of their money and land and property and possessions and homes, they had to leave it all behind. He says, behold, down in verse 18, which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor that he takes under the sun, and all the days of his life which God gives him, for it is his portion. Every man also to whom God has given riches and wealth, and hath given him power to eat thereof, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in his labor. This is a gift of God. How many arrogant people have I ever seen in my life never acknowledge that the bounty and the blessings and the wealth that they may possess was a blessing that came from God, not something that they did on their own. For he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answers him in the joy of his heart, or keeps him busy, as it should be rendered. Chapter 6, all he does, and yet he is not fulfilled and not satisfied here is the notes that I have here. He talks about the rich person, how they go down into the grave. They're buried just like the pauper, as we mentioned earlier. Chapter 8, skipping over to chapter 8 and verse 11, he says, in my notes here, we are limited and have little control over other people. I did want to read this. Chapter 8, down in verse 11. Because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily. We see crimes, we see awful things happen in our society, and we want justice. But sometimes that doesn't happen to somebody who's a thief, a liar, extortioner, or a number of other things. Evil work is not executed speedily. Therefore, the hearts of the sons of men are fully set in them to do evil. Though a sinner do evil 100 times, and his days be prolonged, like some serial killer that lives to be 98 years old and dies in their sleep. Was justice served? Absolutely not. Yet surely I know that it shall be well with them that fear God, which fear before him. But it shall not be well with the wicked. Neither shall he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he fears not before God. I wanted to get that in because that was so important, so critical to his understanding about this constant need to try to gain more and get more and have more wealth and prosperity and power. And in the end, he realized much of it was being gained by wickedness and evil and breaking God's law. Chapter 9 verse things, for all this I considered in my heart, even to declare all this, that the righteous and the wise and their works are in the hand of God. Boy, I need to write that down and put that on my mirror when I'm shaving. And I don't shave anymore, but maybe when I comb my hair in the morning, that they're in the hand of God. Your life is in the hand of God, and that is a sweet thought. Those are principles for living. He gives us throughout that the rest of that chapter there, and we'll skip down to chapter 11. We don't know the outcome of our labor, and as I said in the beginning, do we just cast off everything that we do in our life and say, oh well, it's all vanity, we might as well just hang it up? He says, cast your bread upon the waters, that you shall find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or to 8, For you know not what evil shall be upon the earth. If the clouds be full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if the trees fall toward the south, toward the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it shall be. He that observes the wind shall not sow, and he that regards the clouds shall not reap. As thou knowest not what is the way of the Spirit, nor how the bones do grow in the womb of her that is with child. I'm thinking about my daughter, Rebecca, who is 7 months pregnant right now. And I'm thinking about that little child in there that's being formed, knit in the womb, as David said. Someday I'm going to be a grandparent again. I can't wait. Even so, thou knowest not the works of God who makes all. Like Mark said in his opening statements here. God made it all. He has control of a million galaxies out there. He has control of all the stars and the planets. And he said, in the morning sow your seeds, and in the evening withhold not your hand, for you knowest not whether shall prosper either this or that, or whether they both shall be alike good. Truly the light is sweet, and pleasant things it is for the eyes to behold the sun. But if a man live many years and rejoice in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. All that come is vanity. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth. This story here, this book, and this last chapter, which we're going to read a little bit of here in just a second, was written about an old man who had lived his life, who had all these experiences, and yet he's writing this whole book for the young people to read and to think about and contemplate their life. He says, rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer thee in the days of your youth, and walk in the way of thine heart and in the sight of thine eyes. But know thou that for all these things God will bring thee into judgment. Therefore remove sorrow from your heart, and put away evil from your flesh. For childhood and youth are vanity. You remember what the Apostle Paul said, when I was a child, I thought as a child, but when I was older, I put away childish things. I had to become mature at some point. Chapter 12, verse 1. Remember now the Creator in the days of your youth. As I said, this is written to the young people. While the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when you shall say, I have no pleasure in them. While the sun or the light or the moon or the stars be not darkened, nor the clouds return after the rain. He's talking here now about an elderly old man who's lived his life, and his vitality, his joy, his ability is actually restricted now. He can't do the things that he did when he was 25. In the days when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and that's talking about his hands, his arms. You ever see someone shaking when they're trying to pay for their meal or get their billfold out and their arms are shaking? When the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow themselves, and he's talking about his legs. The strong men that carried me all the days of my life. And the grinders cease because they are few. His teeth are now gone. Maybe he has false teeth. And those that look out the windows be darkened. His eyesight is not quite what it once was. And the doors shall be shut in the streets when the sound of the grinding is low. And he shall rise up at the voice of the bird, and all the daughters of music shall be brought low. Also when they shall be afraid of that which is high, and fear shall be in the way, and the almond tree shall flourish. He's talking now about his hair is turning gray, or already turned white. And the grasshopper shall be a burden. In other words, it's like a grasshopper that used to make long jumps. Now, with his little cane, he's making these little feeble steps. He can't even walk like he used to. And desire shall fail. I believe that is talking about the desire he once had, perhaps, for his wife. because man goes to his long home and the mourners go about the streets. Or ever the silver cord be loosed, or the golden bowl be broken, or the pitcher be broken at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern. Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. We're bound to live a life of all kinds of opportunities. You know, life is a journey. It's a wonderful saga. There are peaks and valleys and highs and lows, and there's a beginning and an end. It gives us the opportunity to gather knowledge, wisdom, and experience, but it never quite fully satisfies the eternal longing to live and to participate in yet one more day. It forces us to beg the question, as Solomon did, why? Why all of these experiences? Some gratifying, some excruciating, some with extreme joy, and some with the darkest of sorrow. This book lifts our eyes from the mundane, everyday futility, and it casts our eyes toward the horizon to dream of the end, the future of our existence, and to place into perspective the temporary nature of this present life. Looking back, we have a catalog of futile and vain meanderings like Solomon did. They will someday give us the distinction with which to compare things that are not in vain. So we travel along, being careful not to spend too much time on things that will never give us peace of mind, and we concentrate more on the things of God. And as he says down in verse 14, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter, or chapter 12, verse 13 and 14. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment, with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. That is the conclusion of the whole matter.